is strong. Those were the final words delivered by President Joe Biden during his State of the Union speech last night, which touched on the economy, jobs, and health care. President Biden also issued a call to action for Congress when it comes to police reform in the wake of Tyree Nichols' death at the hands of Memphis police.
But what happened to Tyree in Memphis happens too often. We have to do better. Give law enforcement the real training they need. Hold them to higher standards. All of us in this chamber, we need to rise to this moment. We can't turn away. Let's do what we know in our hearts, what we need to do. Let's come together to finish the job on police reform.
All right, so while both Republicans and Democrats agreed on that point, at other times, President Biden was drowned out by his opposition. So joining us this morning, Congressman Jamaal Bowman, who represents the 16th Congressional District, which covers the Bronx and Westchester, and who was in the room where it happened last night. So good morning, Congressman. I know it was a late night for you, but thanks for being up early for us.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
So first and foremost, I guess let's talk about, just before we get into the issues of the speech, the overall demeanor of the room, right? Because in the past, if anybody heckled the president, they'd be sanctioned. What do you make of what we saw play out last night?
Yeah, so I think the president kind of invited some of the heckling. He was like jostling, politically jostling with the Republicans during his speech in a very savvy, creative way. And he got them to bite in support of many of the issues he cares about and the country cares about, like Medicare and Social Security. So I didn't think that was the usual heckling. I thought he was just up there sort of in his zone, having a good time. And that was kind of the overall mood in the room. I mean, it was, I thought, an excellent speech, an A speech, and I'll tell you why it's not an A+ for me in a minute. But it was an A speech. It was uplifting. Yeah. It was inspiring. He, for the first time, spoke about public safety from the perspective of victims of police violence. When he talked about not ever having to give the talk to his kids and understanding how Black families like me as a father have to have to talk with my kids, that was a powerful moment, not just last night, but in American history.
Yeah, so why not an A+?
So he didn't go far enough on immigration. You know, you had an earlier story today about migrants coming into New York City. We need comprehensive immigration reform, and we need leadership on that particular issue. We need to make it easier, the legal pathway easier to get to the United States. And we need to do more in providing humanitarian aid to asylum seekers in our country. Look, the bottom line is this. The countries that many of the migrants are fleeing from are in such dire straits because of historic American policy and because we haven't done enough to support the harm or to reverse the harm that we have caused in countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So we have to do more from a humanitarian standpoint. And the crisis, quote unquote crisis at the border, I think is exaggerated in many ways because the majority of the quote unquote fentanyl that comes in and the drugs that come in come through legal ports. Yeah. So we have to have an honest conversation about what's actually happening at the border. But I wish he would have went further in terms of talking about helping asylum seekers and a pathway to comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah, understood. We had Governor Kathy Hochul on the show earlier this morning, really talking about the need for some federal aid as well. But, you know, you mentioned the president and whether or not he had, you know, the talk that he did not have to have with his children. And that brings me to this conversation because Tyree Nichols' parents were in the chambers to hear the president speak about that police reform. So where do you believe Congress is really at with passing the George Floyd Policing Act?
Nowhere. Congress is nowhere because Tim Scott, a Republican in the Senate, dropped the ball last Congress, and we have yet to reintroduce the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and we have yet to reintroduce any other piece of legislation. So at this moment, we are nowhere. We'll see where we will be. I'm going to be meeting with the CBC today, I believe, and we're going to have a discussion around okay, the pathway forward on the House side, but also on the Senate side, because Senator Cory Booker has been directly involved.
Yeah.
But it's not just the work that needs to be done at the federal level. States, counties, and cities can do a lot more on this particular issue. But the rhetoric is changing now because a president like Biden, a white man, admitted publicly that there were things about this issue he didn't understand.
Right.
In contrast to Obama, as a black man, when he talked about Trayvon Martin. So I'm hoping the consciousness is shifting a bit. And listen, we can support law enforcement and have accountability. You could do both for those things. We have to not be afraid to talk about accountability when it comes to law enforcement. They're not allowed to break the law, just like we're not allowed to break it.
Exactly. Well, for those that were in the room and even anybody watching at home, things got pretty rowdy last night, right? I mean, especially when the president talked about Medicare and Social Security. Let's listen to part of that exchange and then talk about it on the other side.
Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Look, folks.
It seems like President Biden, and some might say, was provoking the GOP. I don't know if that was part of his strategy, but then you also saw Speaker Kevin McCarthy hushing some of the members of his own party. So what's your take on that? Was he kind of egging them on, and do you think the GOP went too far?
That was Jedi Master Biden right there. That was a great, he played the Jedi mind trick on the entire GDP. Listen, I encourage everyone to go back and watch the speech and pay very close attention to what the GOP doesn't stand for as the president gives his speech. They don't want the wealthy to pay an equitable tax and contribute their fair share. They don't want large corporations to pay their fair share, but they want to, they don't want to raise the debt ceiling, but they want to cut Social Security and they want to cut Medicare. These are facts. These are things that they have said publicly time and time again over the years. So this is who they are. And so for them to be embarrassed by the way he called them out publicly to the world yesterday, that's shame on them, because this is the rhetoric they've been using since McCarthy has gotten the gavel. But this is rhetoric that goes back. They claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility, but President Trump, our debt that we currently have, 25% of it can be attributed to President Trump. Democratic presidents historically usually lower the national deficit. So, he played the Jedi mind trick on them last night.
All right, there you go. Congressman Jamaal Bowman, appreciate you being here this morning to talk through this, and we'll hope to have you back soon, okay?
Of course. Thank you both.